nature is strictly material.
Thomas, why is Mr. Neville interested in my sheets?
Madam, he's to draw them wet outside the laundry.
Wet? Why does he want them wet?
Madam, I cannot answer you that. Perhaps he has fond memories of being a baby.
For drawing number 3, from 11 o'clock in the morning until 1 o'clock, the back and north side of the house will be kept clear.
Well, you get the point. So he has protocol, which is supposed to aid him in the production of accurate representation. He has tools that are supposed to aid him in the production of accurate representation, and he has a kind of methodology. But they all go completely wrong, even though he does make very, very accurate drawings. I'll leave it up to you to see the rest of that film because the story is fantastic. And it's an extremely beautiful film. But Antonioni deals with something similar in Blow Up. This question of methodology, representation, creating truth, and in both Draftsman's Contract and in Blow Up, there's a question of whether the person who's using the tool is actually aware of what the tool can provide for them, of what it can actually help them see or perceive or record. Draftsman's Contract, he's trying to be accurate. He records certain things which are evidence for a murder. Blow Up, the photographer's trying to be accurate. He records certain things which could be evidence for a murder. The setup here is the photographer, Hemmings' character, is out drifting one day in the city, taking pictures in a park. He sees some people going up the side of the hill. He follows them to the other side of the park, and he watches them. If you haven't seen much Antonioni, you have already recognized that he's the master of the very weird shot, the empty frame, the back of people's heads, the angles that start provoking you to think what's outside the frame. This sequence in the park is remarkable because he keeps jumping back and forth between their point of view or something that's above the park and Tom's photographer's point of view and these kinds of shots which are looking directly at him. So he's positioning you in this very unstable place in relationship to the event that's taking place. So the woman sees him taking pictures. She comes, she tries to get the pictures. He says no. She says she's going to come to his studio. He goes back to his studio, and he starts looking at them to understand what happened, because he knows that something happened. But he doesn't really know what. And there are a series of different instrumentalities or apparati or methodologies that are put into play here. When he took the pictures, he didn't know something was going on. I mean, he knew something was because they seemed to be having a kind of a lover's meeting, but he didn't know anything else. He took the pictures. He even took some pictures when he wasn't entirely looking through the viewfinder. So now he's gone back to the workplace to figure out what happened. So the apparatus in this case is something which doesn't allow you to apprehend a truth in the instant. The apparatus is something which insists that you revisit the event. There's a kind of a temporality in both device and in methodology that work with the apparatus like this. The way that he uses his studio practice is in fact also a kind of an apparatus. He comes to a realization, you can see he's really vexed by this whole situation, that something might have been happening there that was much more intense than he thought. Which one? The one we saw a few minutes ago?
The first one.
So he finally sees that something is there. And amazingly enough, he doesn't really even notice that there's something lying in the grass. He doesn't fully grasp this. He thinks that he's actually prevented a murder. There are two really great films that are remakes of Blow Up. One is Conversation by Coppola, and one is Blowout by Brian De Palma. You see what Antonioni does here. The photographer is revisiting the event through the recording he made, through the agency of the apparatus. Antonioni is putting us into his point of view. He's also doing this really weird thing where the sound of the park is coming back. Very subtle, maybe effective, maybe not so effective. And he's building this kind of episodic narrative that presumably is what the photographer himself is thinking right now. Oh, there was a tryst. Someone was there to assassinate someone. And he thinks he prevented the assassination. And again, amazingly, he doesn't see the body lying in the bushes. So, once again, the question of what the apparatus can do and what the model can do. In both Draftsman's Contract and in Blow Up, the apparatus is connected to the production of a valid model. And it's assumed that the valid model is going to operate through the apparatus. You're going to be able to navigate these different landscapes using the apparatus and learn something for real about them. Learn something true. He's calling his agent to say, now, I can't believe this, but I saw the murder. Okay, last example for apparatus, Andromeda Strain. Another great science fiction film, 1971, B film. The setup here is that an alien life form has arrived on Earth, crash landed with a satellite, wiped out a town, and the military and the government and scientists are trying to figure out what happened. They're struggling against time because they think there might be a global outbreak. Probably some of you have seen this or a recent bad remake. There are a couple of things that are interesting here. One is the way that the apparatus is used to produce truth. And another, which I think is maybe equally important to illustrate, is the idea that scientists are trying to think through the capacity of the alien, which in this case is this kind of green crystal. The alien point of view in this film is as important as the human. So this film, and maybe Exorcist too, to some degree, is as much about the point of view of something which is non-human as it is about the point of view of the human. The production of truth we usually think is, what we do. We use devices to produce truth, to understand relationships. But in Andromeda Strain, this idea of the production of truth is actually related to the scientists grasping not what the human will of the alien system is, but what the capacity of the alien system is as an agent.
Stone, can I see you? I have the results of the growth cultures.
No, we can't leave now. We have an Andromeda cell on the EM. Okay, Charlie, let's put it on the screen. Let's run it through the computer for contrast expansion.
Stone?
What do you think?
Looks like a crystal. Well, gentlemen, there's our answer.
To what?
How Andromeda functions without amino acids.
Crystalline structure.
Yes. I've often thought that living matter might be based on crystals of some kind. All these wedge-shaped compartments, they'd serve to separate biochemical functions very well.
divided. In a vacuum? Bombarded by electrons, it shouldn't even be alive.
That's what I wanted to tell you. The growth program shows Andromeda can live on anything. Only gas or light affected.
Okay. Well, they find out a little bit more too, and they almost run foul with their own nuclear failsafe device. But the point here is that they're sensitive to what we could call the energetic needs of this alien system, to the way that it would affect human bodies, to the way that it would feed off the explosion of the nuclear device. They can't talk to it. It's just a crystal from outer space, right? But it's almost completely abstract, but they have to communicate with it somehow. So it's presumed that the operation of science on some level is a form of communication as much as a production of truth. They're trying to establish what you could call an epistemological horizon. They're trying to figure out what the limits of their ability to know are and push it further. And they're relying on known science to do that and speculative thinking to do that, to push it outside their realms of perception. Okay, so that was the models and apparatus chunk. So we started off with complex landscapes, which we didn't really have an ability to grasp. We just looked at some approaches to understand what a complex landscape would be, to understand the forces that are moving through it, to understand how we might have agency and relationship to it. And I want to finish with a meditation on contemporary challenges and what the kind of consequences of the use and misuse of models could be. Let's start with Virilio. This amazing quote from Vision Machine, which illustrates the kind of political agencies that are at stake and what kind of broader historical systems they link to. So, Hitler's architect Speer organized the Nazi Zeppelin field festivities and advocated the value of ruins. For the party rally at Nuremberg in 1935, he used 150 anti-aircraft searchlights with their beams pointing upwards, making a rectangle of light in the night sky. He wrote, "Within these luminous walls, the first of their kind, the rally took place with all its rituals. I now feel strangely moved by the idea that the most successful architectural creation of my life was a chimera, an immaterial mirage. Doomed to disappear at first light, leaving no more material trace than a few films and the odd photograph. Crystal Castle was especially aimed at Nazi militants who, according to Goebbels, obey a law they are not even consciously aware of, but which they could recite in their dreams." Okay, so spectacular mediascapes, propaganda, political manipulation, hundreds of thousands of people gathering together at night for the festivities. Almost by definition, the social catharsis that this would produce creates a kind of release which ends in a closed system. It separates the individual experience from the world, but then kind of re-cements each of us when we participate back to the world with the force of the emotion, the unhinging of identity and nature that then get rejoined. When I use the term catharsis, I'm basically saying that it returns the subject to a status quo state after traversal of a kind of an incomplete metamorphosis, an incomplete liminal condition. The motor that drives this is our kind of obsessive and subjective reflections on history and experience, but they lack a broader ability to evolve over time, and the people who orchestrated these kind of events understood that very clearly. They were building a mechanism which took a limited number of models of ways to think and see, scaled them massively, deployed them across a population, and cemented those kinds of emotional, intellectual assemblages. What you could even call a time-form configuration, right? What Speer delivered, what the people who organized this event delivered, was oriented towards the control of a system's tendency, a population, to move to a new structurally significant configuration. And Virilio calls this a kind of topographical amnesia. So Brunner wrote Shockwave Rider in the early 70s. He predicted many aspects of our life today: the net, the emergence of worms on the net, hacking, ambient global information ecologies, microcultures, crowdsourcing, future shock. And as we participate more and more in a kind of globalizing and modernizing world, a world where we can't separate our being from technology, the question that I would ask here would be, what kinds of future shock are we experiencing? Jump back to Speer and the Nuremberg rallies, forward to Shockwave Rider, difficult data retrieval, is a kind of euphemism in Shockwave Rider for torture and interrogation. The very first thing you see in Shockwave Rider is a person being interrogated, forcibly interrogated. The politics of data retrieval. Surveillance, privacy, interrogation, the technology of interrogation, of mapping, and communication are all converging on each other. So that was Brunner talking in the early 70s about where we really seem to be today. Right? Isn't Nick in Shockwave Rider Assange? It's the exact same storyline, it's the exact same setup. Releasing vast amounts of government data. So, of course, the agency that's possible in Shockwave Rider that Brunner is hoping for is that people like Nick can actually do what people like Assange are doing. They can release that information. And those people aren't just special people. In Shockwave Rider, Nick is actually rather special. But they can also be ordinary people. So the instrumentalities that we're dealing with right now in terms of information exchange cut both ways. And that's how I want to wrap up with the last couple of examples, is the question of how it, the old chestnut from Heidegger, where the danger lies, so there too is the saving power. So Bernard Vinge is dealing with a future 40 years ahead of us, much like Brunner was dealing with a future 40 years ahead of him. Brunner nailed it fairly well. We'll see how closely Vinge nails it. The section he's cutting through his world examines a set of themes that have to do with individual and collective agency, surveillance, but he focuses much more on biotech, biosecurity, military security, and governance in relationship to phenomena that we're only now really starting to grasp, like crowdsourcing. And of course, Vinge deals with these phenomena, showing how they can be harnessed for both great good and great evil. One of my favorite passages in Rainbow's End is the very first page, where this is what he says. The first bit of dumb luck came disguised as a public embarrassment for the European Center of Defense Against Disease. On July 23rd, school children in Algiers claimed that a respiratory epidemic was spreading across the Mediterranean. The claim was based on clever analysis of antibody data from the mass transit systems of Algiers and Naples. So, the image he's presenting us with is one where global biosecurity discoveries are as likely to be made by 10-year-old kids analyzing open source city data as they are to be made by governmental biosecurity teams. And this seems very plausible to me. I think of the work that students at part3 are doing, recent graduates, people like Leif Persifield. I think about the way that the cost of hardware is going down and the availability of data is going up. I think about the vision that someone like Charles Strauss has in Rule 34, or comments he's made recently on his blog about ubiquitous computation. If a city invested a couple of $1 billion to make sure that there were a few trillion processors ambiently deployed, what would you do with it? What would you do with it? What would the government do with it? What would a hacker do with it? These all seem like very viable futures to me. And what could cut more sharply both ways? A world where this kind of ubiquity that Vinge describes, or Charles Strauss describes, allows that to happen. It's also filled with great potential. Because in a world like that, a single individual could have global agency. And that, of course, is what Vinge is worried about at Rainbow's End. That a single smart individual could have great, great global agency. So what can you do about this? This is the kind of design challenge that we're faced with. And I always love to throw this little factoid in because it just constantly blows me away, and it's connected to what Sven was talking about in his talk, where he introduced the recent research on junk DNA and the fact that it is not indeed junk at all. Each of us is an exceptionally complex ecosystem. We are populated with trillions of friendly and often not so friendly parasites, viruses and bacteria, riding as passengers on us and in our bodies. Totally not science fiction, totally real. This is part of a recent New York Times article. Everywhere we look now, we're starting to acknowledge in popular culture, oh yeah, well, not only are we living in an ecosystem, every one of us is an ecosystem. You can scrape your tooth and do a DNA analysis on it, and the chance is high that you will come up with a novel organism that no one has ever discovered. I'm not bullshitting. This is the kind of stuff that has been done. People like Paul Davies and Chuck Lineweaver are working on this. Carl Zimmer. It's absolutely what we are. Each one of us is a walking, talking bioreactor, creating innovation in a global system, in a global landscape. So what Vinge is doing is he's taking that idea and he's plugging it back into the downward cost of technology, the increasing availability of data, to essentially speculate on what biosecurity will be in the near future. And his anticipation basically puts any future global ethics right in the design space that's just opened up to us when you think about what the consequences of this are. So this is kind of what's at stake. This was 10 years ago. Rob Carlson, writing in Biosecurity and Bioterrorism, Biodefense Strategy, Practice, and Science. He was speculating in 2003 that within 10 years, it would be possible for a single person to sequence or synthesize 10 to the 10 bases a day, and that, quote, given the power and threat of biological technologies, the only way to ensure safety in the long run is to push research and development, open and distributed networks of researchers would provide an intelligence gathering capability and a flexible and robust workforce. It's exactly what Vinge is testing in his scenario in Rainbow's End. So what's at stake? You know, the next image is a little bit shocking. This guy is real. You may have heard of him. He has a slight DNA configuration different from most of us, and human papillomavirus does this to him. His skin is essentially growing something in between a wart and a fingernail all over his body. This kind of thing is relatively rare, but one imagines, and I'm showing you a figure of a recognizable human body that's been made less